Hey again! It's time for our final episode of the species of Saorsa. So, who do we get to meet this week? First off, the Nogitsune. These fox-like creatures are magical in nature and require a steady diet of etheric energy to survive. Where this becomes a problem is that these Nogitsune aren't able to digest just raw, straight-up etheric energy, so instead they require that it be processed first by other creatures, such as how carnivores require a herbivore to process the nutrients in grass by converting it into meat, or how the herbivores can't process raw solar energy and must eat plants. So, what does this mean for our rather fluffy magical friends here? Well, it means they're basically vampiric in nature. The Nogitsune siphon off energy directly from another individual's soul, feeding directly from this ready-made source of soul energy, which they themselves, as spirits, are incapable of producing on their own. To make matters more complex for the Nogitsune, the efficiency of transference is directly proportional to the bond between the two. You know that thing that's said about two lovers become one shared soul? Well, yeah, that's actually a bit more accurate to reality in Saorsa than you might think. Were a Nogitsune to attempt to feed off an unwilling participant, the energy drained would be exceptionally low in nutritional value, as well as highly inefficient in transference. Essentially, it'd taste awful, wouldn't be very filling, and a great deal of harm to whoever she's feeding off of. All around, a pretty bad deal for everyone involved. So, with this in mind, the Nogitsune have developed a variety of adaptations to allow their survival. One of the most basic of these is exceptionally powerful, innate illusionary magics, as well as limited shape-shifting capability. Occasionally, you'll hear the tale of someone who found out their wife of 40 years turned out to be a Nogitsune, and never had they once suspected such. Which leads us directly into Nogitsune culture. The vast majority of the time, Nogitsune tend to avoid one another. There's no real advantage to being close with another of their kind. Not only can they not feed upon each other, they also can't breed with one another, and even being near each other increases the risk of detection, and that's bad, given how their vampiric nature is typically resented by most everyone else. So what kind of a culture do these fox women have? In particular, they adapt and assimilate into other cultures with incredible speed and ease, slipping into whatever role happens to be available to them with great enthusiasm. In fact, the Nogitsune relish and savor other cultures with such intensity that it's actually quite common for the most influential members of a society to be Nogitsune. Even, nay, especially, members of their churches and faiths. The Nogitsune are naturally attracted towards large congregations of people, despite the inherent risks associated with such. Even just being present in a room of heated emotions, of joy, of lust, worship, it all produces an ambient energy flow, which invigorates the Nogitsune, especially if the eyes of the masses all fall upon her. From religious leaders to opera singers to housewives, the Nogitsune trend towards being exceptionally devoted to whatever their food source enjoys most. No matter where they go, there's no denying that these are indeed highly social animals. The very breeding nature of the Nogitsune is special as well, in that they're incapable of producing offspring with another of their kind. Nogitsune are all female, with there being no males of their species whatsoever. So long as intense enough of an emotional connection is maintained, the Nogitsune is able to siphon off enough soul energy to create her offspring. This intense bond is typically created in the traditional method, and most often Nogitsune will trend towards a single male lover in order to cultivate the intensity of that bond and avoid any awkward questions. But there's no real limitation for their species. They can breed with any creature, male or female or otherwise, so long as that creature has a soul to feed upon in ample amount. Meaning the one species the Nogitsune can't breed with is their own kind. More than this, though rare, it's quite fully possible for a Nogitsune to become pregnant from ingesting a heavy enough dose of soul energy from an ambient source, such as a crowd of the most religiously devout, so long as she's the central icon they're connected to. This has led to several odd virgin births, as it were, upon a few different planets by Nogitsune who have, shall we say, eaten for 2 or 4. It's quite common for Nogitsune to have several children at a time, all of which will be Nogitsune like she is, and all of which will be female. Upon birth, the young Nogitsune kids will naturally be cloaked in an illusionary guise to make them appear as whichever species' soul energy was used to grant them life in the first place. This natural adaptation keeps others from inquiring of their young's origins, and Nogitsune mothers tend to be highly possessive of their children, typically disallowing others to so much as touch their young. There are, however, some traits which are practically universal among the Nogitsune and could be loosely conceived of as a culture of sorts. For example, the Nogitsune in general have a distaste for revealing more information about themselves than need be provided. To a Nogitsune, the purpose of language is to express a concept, to elicit an emotional response, or to convey meaning. Context is of little to no value outside of the capacity to understand the intended message. Due to this belief, Nogitsune are typically viewed as notorious pathological liars. It's not uncommon for an individual Nogitsune to spin tale after tale fraught with hyperbole and outright fabrication. Her goal is not to provide accurate details, as those are of little importance to the story, but to clearly express the meaning behind the story. For example, you planted that arboretum, didn't you? From my windowsill to the pantry. The lush growth is wondrous. True, it's difficult to get at the flower now, and the stream which crosses through the dining room does make it difficult to find room for the chairs. But oh, the scent and the color are so vibrant. This is one of the most telltale signs that one is speaking with a Nogitsune. The overly dramatic exaggeration of nearly every statement made. In the above example, she makes it clear that she enjoys the flowers, and she's certain she knows who placed them upon her windowsill. She also cites 2 scenarios where the vase has gotten in the way a little bit, but that she's alright with such due to how nice they smell and look. Almost the entirety of everything to a word which has been said is false, but each phrase is chosen to present a clear subtext of her thoughts on the matter. The religion of the Nogitsune is also universal, a seemingly genetic memory passed down from mother to daughter without need for communication in any traditional sense. To each and all, the lady, a vast and timeless entity which takes the shape of a golden-furred Nogitsune with 1,000 tails, each stretching out to curl around a different world, is ever present. Such is it that each Nogitsune innately knows of this religious belief, and yet it doesn't clash with any other beliefs they hold. Truly, a Nogitsune can blend seamlessly into the religion of her surrounding culture with ease, and her knowledge of the lady doesn't interfere, but only amplifies what other religious beliefs she comes to hold. For the physical capabilities of the Nogitsune, these creatures are spirits, rather than being entirely corporeal in nature. Their physical manifestation is that of a humanoid fox with several tails. Additional tails act as anchors to reality for these spirits, allowing them to manifest more of their latent powers. Unlike the other species of Saorsa, the bulk of the Nogitsune's special talents are locked behind the limitations of their tails, restricting their overall capabilities until they grow beyond a certain range of power. Once a new tail has been earned, however, the Nogitsune possesses a greater range of innate abilities she can tap into. An example of this would be the Nogitsune ball, a sliver of her spiritual essence siphoned off and kept separate from her own personal being. She's able to control this bright white ball of energy with an outer field, which corresponds to the Nogitsune's current emotional state. While in control of the ball, she can use it to channel spells through it, though it were a spell focus, increase the range of her spells, or use it for ranged attacks as though she were physically touching the target herself. Another innate form of Nogitsune power is that of her natural weapons. Her retractable claws are made of an etherically charged form of calcium, which exists both in the physical and astral planes at the same time. Similar to dragons, Nogitsune are also able to breathe fire, though shorter in range. The Nogitsune's Foxfire is available for unlimited uses as she so desires. Known in particular for their agile grace, the Nogitsune's very movements are best described as being practically a dance, each step and motion carefully choreographed for flawless precision. So exacting is the nature of this dance that it can be used in combat to exceptional effect, weaving through a sea of attacks with nary a scratch left upon her. That the Nogitsune possess many tails is not lost upon them either, and they may well employ them as weapons of war, strapping a blade to each and expanding their endless dance into the species-specific fighting style known as the 1,000 Blades, attacking enemies from many directions at once and then falling back amidst a flurry of parries from their multitude of weapons. Relying upon elusive maneuvers, illusion, and misdirection, all interwoven, it can prove quite difficult to land even a single blow upon a grand mistress of the 1,000 Blades. Even unarmed, the Nogitsune are not without defenses. Their venomous bite, which both sedates a target and vastly increases their sensitivity to physical touch, is commonly used. Though originally an adaptation meant for breeding and feeding purposes, in combat, the bite of a Nogitsune can amplify pain well beyond the thresholds capable of being felt by normal creatures normally, allowing for even a slight graze of a blade to feel as though it were a grave mortal wound. The final major ability of the Nogitsune we'll cover here today, though not the last in their repertoire, is the capacity for the Nogitsune to re-anchor herself to the corporeal world with her tails. When nearing the point where she would lose her grasp on reality and phase out of existence, essentially the point when other creatures would die, she may instead choose to sacrifice one of her tails, the physical form vanishing and leaving behind only an ethereal gaseous, incandescent glow in its wake. By doing so, she is able to reinforce her position and withstand even greater physical punishment before being forced to retreat back to the astral realm to heal. Doing so comes with a price, however. By sacrificing a tail in this manner, she's sacrificing a portion of her spiritual energy, and even magical healing won't restore her lost tail. She must needs feed again before she can reinfuse her spirit with the energy reserves needed to maintain her lost tail. Until that time, any additional benefits she would have gained from having the extra tail or tails, should she so choose to sacrifice several, these benefits are lost until the tail or tails are restored to their corporeal state once more. Overall, the Nogitsune work very well with flame and illusion alike, and blend into nearly any crowd, soon becoming the voice of the crowd itself. They strike intensely strong emotional bonds with others, and get along exceptionally well with nearly any species. Other species, however, often consider their vampiric tendencies to be a blight upon society, and frequently seek to drive out the Nogitsune once discovered. As such, it's not uncommon for Nogitsune to spend her entire life hidden behind a mask that the world never see her true form. It's becoming a bit more accepted in recent years, however, for Nogitsune to reveal their true form upon Saorsa, though many still choose to hide behind their illusions. And that leads us to our last, but not least, species of Saorsa, the Polaris. These immense arachnids dwarf even the rather robust Verax in sheer size, though commonly described as quiet and introspective. Few would call them gentle giants after witnessing them on the hunt. Make no mistake, the Polaris are predators through and through. The most notable physical form of the Polaris is their large, spider-like lower torso, somewhat vaguely akin to what one might expect from a centaur, except arachnid in nature. Large jade talons tip each of their legs, allowing for crossing many different surfaces with speed and intent. Though large, the Polaris are anything but lumbering oafs, able to climb vertically as quickly as they can make a dash across open ground. Their swiftness is legendary, as is their silence, except for when they choose to sing. Upon the backs of the upper torso of the Polaris are a series of stalks which may be raised, each pairing providing a different echoed voice. Each Polaris is capable of presenting an entire choir by themselves. Ventriloquism is a commonly learned skill among the Polaris, and often they can reflect and redirect their many voices off of nearby trees or other hard surfaces, confusing and herding prey into a web spun in advance, and then the Polaris simply descends and wraps up their prey. Now, only the primary voice of a given Polaris differs from those around them. The uniformity of their additional stock voices are often used for additional context, echoing statements and thoughts along the way. These primary voices are soft, silken, and travel only a short distance, nearly a whisper. Calming and sultry in nature, most other species describe the voice of the Polaris, male or female, as giving a siren a run for her money. The additional stock voices are able to reach different frequencies and ranges, allowing for a broader range of where they can reach, and amphitheaters are common constructs within Polaris villages. Normally, the Polaris prefer to remain quiet, speaking in hushed tones so as not to chase off prey, and to be able to better tend to their webs, awaiting the familiar tremor of snared prey. But the pastime of singing is one which is commonly shared by the Polaris, with the ethereal sound drawing prey forwards rather than chasing it off most oft. Out of all the traits which stand out of the Polaris, though, is their duality of nature. Hailing from the world of Dichotomia, this hefty moon is slung between two larger planets, one possessing a powerful electromagnetic field, and the other a potent magnetic field. Dichotomia circles these two worlds in a figure-8 style orbit, changing back and forth from one field to the next. And as such, the Polaris have adapted a dual brain to compensate. One half of the Polaris's mind wakes as the other sleeps. Two individuals inhabiting a single body, destined never to meet directly with one another. At least, such was the case upon their homeworld. Drawn to Saorsa, the Polaris find both minds able to wake at the same time and interact with one another, which can lead to a great deal of confusion to those who find themselves upon the rehabilitation planet. Of the many oddities this entails, one of the most notable is that individual Polarians tend to have their two halves study similar fields, yet prefer different specializations from one another. Though the two inhabit the same body, it's generally considered ill to speak of one's other half directly. Instead, the large, ornate horns upon the Polaris' heads are often used to leave messages from one to their other half. Rarely do the two speak directly to one another, usually opting to have one sleep while the other wakes so as not to step on each other's toes, in a rather literal manner due to the risk of the conflicting desires of which body part to move at each given time. The electric half on the Polaris, typically most oft dominating during the day, are known for their sharp, analytical, and logical reasoning, rarely allowing their more base and primal instincts to take over. They're often to the point, wasting words rarely, if ever, and tend to be surprisingly brief in general. Their speech often sounds to be more like they're speaking a broken attempt at language, as if the inherent translation upon Saorsa had broken down. In actuality, they simply don't bother to include anything beyond the most absolutely needed information. The night, or etheric Polaris, the second mind of each, is quite a different story, however. Impassioned reasoning and desire tends to flow far more freely from the etheric brain, as does magic itself. It's not entirely uncommon for the two halves of Valerian to hold wildly different views on many topics, to have separate mates, or to even train in entirely separate tasks. In fact, some players hold two distinctly different classes when it comes to combat, training in each separately, though it's far more common to have similar tastes with differences in how to apply such as pursuing the same class but different specializations. A defensive-oriented Polarian, for example, will trend towards using physical or magical defenses, depending upon which mind is in charge at a given time, but the overall defensive preference will oft be shared between the two halves of the whole. The religion of the Polaris encapsulates the differences and the intertwined fates of both halves. The idea of all Polaris being viewed as a pair of strands of silk braided together as one and used to weave the tapestry of reality known as the Kismet. This religious belief is not without merit. more of a descriptor of what is known of fate, rather than a prescriptive element, as in many religions and myths. Indeed, the concept of destiny itself is viewed as a vast sea of multidimensional fabric, with each individual attached to the grand tapestry via a strand of fate. As a whole, it's viewed that each individual is responsible for each other. To harm another is to harm one's own self, each strand being woven in such intricate patterns that it can be nigh impossible to predict how one's actions will affect the weaving of the tapestry, but that good actions tend to return back to oneself in time, sooner or later. While there are competing views among the Polaris as to the specific nature of what the Kismet is, or what actions are deemed to be good, there is no direct deity which oversees such, at least according to the views of the Polaris themselves. This isn't to state that the Polaris deny the existence of deities as a class of very powerful being, but they view these entities as simply being larger pictures woven into the tapestry and built of the same strands of fate, thereby making even the greatest gods of other species' religions to appear as no more special than mortals beyond the number of strands they possess. Drawn to Saorsa, the vast bulk of the Polaris are in agreement with the concept of possessing a personal sin, though often such is viewed through the lens of the fabric of the Kismet. Such a failing is viewed as a miswoven strand of the strands of fate, an error not of the fabric, but of the weaver herself. To understand the error is to reduce the likelihood of future errors being enacted, and so most walk the path of redemption without reservation. Some do, however, question whether such is the best method of learning to properly weave the grand tapestry, and many of these will seek out their own attempts of solving their issues of self with varying degrees of success. The physical capabilities of the Polaris are as considerable as their overbearing stature, from immense speed and climbing capacity to their jade-tipped legs being able to punch through even solid metal unarmed in many cases. The combat capacity for the Polaris is far from anything to scoff at. Given their non-standard shape, with two torsos and a distinctively non-humanoid frame, it's beneficial then that Polaris are able to spin their own silk into a woven fibrous armor, which can provide considerable physical protection, while providing a full range of motion for their flexible bodies as well. That the Polaris already possess the chitinous plating of an exoskeleton, in addition to such, only furthers their defensive capabilities. With the Polaris being so much greater in scale than many other species, and possessing a rear torso, it's quite common for the Polaris to allow a smaller member of their hunting party to ride upon their back. Given that the Polaris tend to think the world in 3 dimensions, including the vertical when it comes to mobility, this may lead to the rider feeling perhaps a bit disoriented at the frequent and sudden shifts of elevation direction chosen. The most interesting of abilities that the Polaris possess, however, are of their 2 halves made whole, allowing for either half to pick a different specialization or prestige class if so desired, as has been mentioned. As the last of the species of Saorsa, the Polaris are quick, strong, and yet highly adaptive. Quiet and blunt, they may not speak often, yet when they do, there's often a great deal of thought which has been boiled down to a few short words for maximum effect. And with that, we've covered the last of the playable core species of Saorsa. There are a few others which won't show up in the base game, such as those reserved for expansion content due to being too similar to the core species, such as Nogitsune, or those who aren't a playable species by default, such as the Assyrians, due to their nature in relation to running Saorsa. Still, those will be spoken of at another time, some point later on in the future. for now, we're done here. So I'm out. I'll see you next time.